Welcome to Drams and Dragons. My name is Gus Berger, and with me is my co-host Dustin Van Horn. How are you doing, man?
Hey Gus, I'm great. Like I was telling you before the show, I smell like a grill. Um,
Yeah,
but got to make some tasty meat for my family, and had a really good day. Busy, but great.
nice.
Yeah, and really looking forward to our topic today.
Same. The topic that we're going to be talking about is Glenn Cook, and to maybe a lesser extent, we're going to be talking about the grimdark genre.
Oh, you gotta use the voice.
Yeah, the fathers
Mhm.
of grimdark.
There it is.
Um, Yeah. So we're gonna be talking about grimdark and the sort of one of the origins of the subgenre of fantasy. And specifically that origin is the author Glenn Cook. And we'll talk all about this. We'll get into all the details. That's what we're going to be talking about. Before we get into it, I am going to drink some whiskey, and I believe you're going to partake a little bit as well. Is that
A little
correct?
bit. Yeah, I
A little
have
bit.
a loose definition of dram tonight, but I think it might still apply. So,
All right. The whiskey that I'm going to be drinking is Laphroaig 10. Now, this is like Glen Cook. This is an absolute classic of its genre.
nice Gus,
Uh,
nice.
yeah, this is Laphroaig is a very classic, old school single malt from Isla. It's a very heavily peated whiskey. Very good. I'm noticing here, and I kind of knew this already. It says at the top of the bottle, by appointment to HRH, the Prince of Wales. So this is like the official Prince of Wales single malt Scotch. So it is actually an absolute classic. They've been making it since 1815 on the Isle of Islay in Scotland, and we're gonna give this a shot. I mean, I say I give it a shot. I'm gonna drink some. I've had it before. This bottle is about three quarters empty, so it's definitely not my like. I like it.
Mhm.
It's not my favorite. I prefer Ardbeg, but it's a nice, inexpensive way to drink some peated Isla whiskey. I think I got this bottle for like $35 or something like that. Like it's
Mhm.
not an expensive whiskey. You know, a lot of scotches these days are pretty expensive. This one's reasonable. So
Still 35 to yeah, today's economy.
yeah, I mean
So
maybe nowadays it would be like 40,
40
45
or
with
something.
tax or something with tax, you know what I mean? Like it's not a
Yeah.
super expensive. It's not like the price hasn't really gone up all that much. Like Lagavulin has gone up
Hmm.
crazy amounts. Ardbeg, the prices have gone up, maybe not as much as Lagavulin. The prices have gone up on that, but Laphroaig. And by the way, I say the name Laphroaig. Don't be fooled by the spelling of the name. Like
Jeez.
it's like one of the weirdest spelling. I mean,
Do
the
a whole
Scots have
podcast
some
on
this, yeah, right. The
yeah.
Scottish people, my people have a very some very strange notions about how do you spell words. uh, and Laphroaig does not look very much like it sounds. So, all right,
Yeah,
I'm gonna
autocorrect
pour.
is your friend, like the Google algorithm of,
Oh yeah.
yeah, the AI is your friend on that. Yeah, actually, I think that was my first peated whiskey that I was given as a gift was a
Hmm.
bottle of Laphroaig. And
Yeah.
yeah, it was introduced to me like that. Like this, it's just like a pure peat experience. And it was. That's very campfirey when I think of it. But I think I'm with you. I would prefer I would buy other ones, but I would if I was gifted a bottle, I would really enjoy it over the course of a couple of years as I had little bit by little
Hmm.
bit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just sort of a very straightforward, reliable
Hmm.
Isla peated Scotch.
And sometimes that's what you want in a dram. You don't want to go on crazy adventures. You want to have something familiar and
Yeah.
easy on the palate. Yeah.
Sometimes it's nice to have something familiar. So, as far as I know, they do add color to this. Yeah, it's not. I mean, you can see, Dustin. You can see it's got a very nice, kind of color.
Yeah, very
Very
oaky.
sort of gold, sort of almost golden. This one is bottled at 43%. Again, like we talk about all these things that different places do. adding color, chill filtering. Are they bad? Are they not bad?
Hmm?
You know, it's I don't know if there's a solid answer to that, but I just so that people know it's probably chill filtered. It doesn't say it's not, therefore it probably is, right?
Hmm.
Uh,
It's just it seems like kind of an issue with whiskeys. Like I'm thinking, I don't know of a reliable way to see if it has colorings in it or if it's been filtered. Yeah, unless they splash it all over the bottle. But
yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing is like usually if it isn't chill filtered, they'll say so.
mm,
Usually, if it doesn't have color added, they'll say so because it's a marketing thing. Like nerds want those things, right? They want the natural thing, right? So the sort of whiskey nerds that are out there push this, and then companies are like, oh well, we can mark it up by $10 if we tell them it, doesn't have these things. So,
mm,
you know, so it
just
doesn't
can't
say it
we
on the
can't have
bottle.
nice things, Gus. We just can't have nice things.
It's okay. I don't know. This is pretty nice. So
Well, no, I
I
mean,
don't
if it
mind.
was, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I'm personally, I'm not that much of a snob where I'm like, ugh, it's been chill filtered. I can't drink this. What is this
Mhm.
crap? I'm not that. That's not me. Right. Like
Yeah,
if it's good, it's good. If it's not good, it's not good. Right. So,
yeah.
um,
That is interesting though. Yeah, if there are people out there who like whiskey, if you found out your favorite whiskey had coloring in it, would it change how you felt about it, you know?
I wouldn't change it for me, but for some
Mm-hmm.
people, I think that it genuinely would. I think some
Mm-hmm.
people would be like, oh, there's color.
Yeah, that's totally the
I
vibe.
can't buy this anymore. Right. There's absolutely yeah. So
Yeah,
all right. So let me do the notes on this real quick.
sounds good.
And it's got a very, it's interesting. It is peaty, it is smoky, but it's not overly so. The Port Charlotte smokier than this. Something like the Ardbeg is way smokier than this. I feel like it is peaty, but not in a sort of heavy-handed way. Sometimes a
Hmm.
heavy-handed like peat is good. I find that compared to some of these other ones, I think it's sort of like relative. Like, what are you comparing it to? If you're comparing it to like unpeated whiskey, you're going to notice the peat a lot more. If you're somebody who drinks a lot more peated whiskey, it might feel a little more restrained and subdued than some of the other ones that are out there. But it still is, you can still smell it. And it has kind of an iodine nature. If you've never had sort of that iodine flavor before, it's hard to compare it to anything else. Or that iodine smell. Yeah, I find it hard to compare to anything else other than iodine or Laphroaig,
Yeah,
basically. Right?
it makes it hard to sell whiskey to normies, like it tastes like iodine
Yeah,
in a
people
good
be like,
way.
it tastes like iodine. What? Ugh.
Trust me, yeah,
But it is actually good.
yeah,
And then it's got a sort of sweetness, almost a malty sweetness or caramel sweetness, subtle. And then above all that, sort of behind all that, is a sort of seaweed brine. It has a brininess to me when I smell it. That's sort of reminds me of the sea. It smells like this has been sitting on a beach somewhere in the cold, which I think it has because they stack their barrels like outside in the weather, right? So
yeah,
um, and they're located on the coast with,
yeah,
rain and wind and salt spray and all that stuff. And it smells like that's where it's been. And it smells good, right?
yeah. You hit on one of my favorite parts about tasting whiskey. Like it tastes like where it's from,
Mhm.
and I like the way Isla tastes.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
agree.
a nice place.
Yeah. So I said I didn't smell the peat very much, but I do taste it very strongly. So it's weaker in terms of the peat on the nose, but in terms of
Okay,
like, it just has a punch when you
just the
drink it.
campfire. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So you don't get the campfire on the nose. At least I didn't. But I get the campfire very strongly on the palate. And it almost is like it's like a wave of smoke that just washes over your tongue and down your throat. And it has that warmth and that heat. And it's like you're sitting in front of a campfire, right? When you drink it. When I smell it, I get these other notes. When I drink it, campfire. It's like inhaling smoke almost with the
but in a good way, right?
but in a good way, like wood smoke or something at a campfire, when you're sort
Mm,
of almost like it's all like a smoke bath almost, right? Like with the wind changes and you get some smoke that like,
ah, and your
yeah, I
kid
know.
kid goes ah.
Yeah, some people like that. Some people don't, I guess, right? I didn't when I was a kid. I don't mind it so much now.
Yeah, I think I like that in my mouth, but I don't like it in my clothes for a
Mhm.
week afterwards.
Yeah.
In fact, yeah, I just discovered a backpack that went camping with us, and it's 4 weeks later. It's still got it lingering.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's not the only flavor that I get. I also get a lot of oak. You drink enough stuff, you get oak. You start to understand what flavors the oak is imparting, right? So this was spice. There's some vanilla. This is the Laphroaig 10 spends 10 years in ex bourbon casks. Now, it's not sweet like bourbon is, I don't think, but I can taste those notes, especially on the back end. I get a lot of those notes, those
Oh, you
bourbony
get that, huh?
notes. I get that. But
Right on.
mostly on the back end, after the peat has sort of started to fade away and is sort of receding, then those kind of bourbony notes come out.
Hmm.
They're not really, they're almost kind of like muddled though. It's sort of just a general impression that I get from that, of that sweetness and of those sort of vanilla caramel notes, but they're subtle. And that smoke really, that peat smoke really dominates.
Nice. Like there's
Yeah.
some finesse in there. Wow, look at that.
Mm-hmm. It's not a super long finish, I
Mhm.
would say. It's fairly quick finish. The finish is short. I mean, it's a relatively, for something that's really smoky like this, it's an easy drinker. Yeah, it doesn't last a long time. It's fairly straightforward. You get what you get. It's the same thing every time, and it's nice.
Nice. Right. Well, right on, man. Is this a recommend for the masses out there?
Yeah, it's a good one. I would say as an entry point. I do recommend it as an entry point
A good way to put it.
uh,
Yeah.
to Isla, like heavily peated Isla whiskey. That's what I would say.
Well, Gus, I think my segment will be quick after your very informative and interesting segment on Laphroaig. I in honor of the Black Company, which is featured in Glen Cook's books. It's a mercenary company. Um, I have made some decaf black coffee, the blackest of
Decaf.
black coffees. It's decaf. It's
Croker would
7:30.
never.
Croker, I know. He might recommend it for me though. I'm not supposed to. I can't drink it at all past noon anymore. I get hurts my sleep. Day 40. Um, and then in
Yeah,
that, I've never
welcome
done
to
this
middle
before.
age, Dustin.
Yeah.
Welcome to middle age.
Yep. It's been fun so far. So this is something I've never done, even though I am middle-aged. I've never put bourbon in coffee. So tonight I'm gonna do that. And
All right.
I'll even do a little tasting. Um,
I'll be honest. I've never put bourbon in coffee. I've had Jameson in coffee or whatever. You know what I mean? Like I've had Irish coffee. Never
yeah,
bourbon though. It's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. That's what people say. Bourbon, and it seems like it would complement. So bourbon's it's supposed to be vanilla-y and sweet, and oaky. Everything seems like it would complement coffee. Now it's a lovely dark roast coffee, and so it tastes like black coffee, and it's good. I used an AeroPress to make it, so it's an Americano. So I've added the bourbon to the coffee.
Did you just ruin your coffee?
No, actually, it's
Oh,
got
okay. The look on your face was like you were searching,
yeah.
and I was like,
Well, so here's what's interesting and what's kind of intriguing about this. So you have the base flavors of the coffee. This one, it's a darker roast. It's a very round flavor. And when I added the bourbon, I got hit with all of the small elements that you pick out through the alcohol. I got like nutmeg and spices
hmm,
and a little bit of vanilla, and the rye really comes out. Um,
interesting. Yeah.
but at the same time, it tastes like very heavily watered down whiskey. Um, but not in a terrible way.
Yeah,
Um,
would it be better if you added a little like cream and sugar? Maybe,
Probably.
probably.
Yeah, I think that would probably be the way. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm a
Yeah.
fan. I'm not sure if I don't like it. It's
And to
a
be
new
clear,
flavor.
that is sorry. To be clear, that is the bullet bourbon from last time,
Yes,
right? Yeah.
from the
So
last
same
time.
same bourbon from last time now added to coffee.
That's very interesting. Changes the like a whole new amalgamation of the two. Like instead of just the bitter that you're expecting, it's the alcohol in this too. It's kind of clashing with all of the notes of the coffee. specifically, like, have you ever mixed like chocolate with what's something that chocolate doesn't go with?
I don't know.
Like
Chocolate goes with most things.
yeah, it goes.
Toothpaste. No,
Yeah,
I don't know.
definitely not toothpaste.
No, I don't know. Chocolate. I
Uh,
can't. I
I
don't
think
know.
it might be the
Sardines.
like
Doesn't
the
go with sardines.
oakiness. Yeah, maybe sardines. Not helping, Gus.
I'm just trying to think of things that chocolate wouldn't go well with.
For me, I think it's the oak. So like, and the oakiness, it's the grains in this. And like I said last time, so the bullet is higher than most bourbons and rye.
Yeah.
And I think that's the combo I'm not liking, and that's kind of clashing.
Yeah.
It's like
I
this
got you.
chocolate nuttiness is just off with the rye. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I got you.
I would give this one, and maybe if you added some cream to it, it'd be all right. But if you're just gonna add bullet to coffee, I'd say maybe skip it.
Maybe skip it. So just
Yeah,
drink the bourbon, drink the coffee, keep them separate.
yeah. Never the
Don't
two
make
shall
not
meet.
yeah, not bourbon coffee or not,
No.
or at least not bullet coffee.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'll give that one a
Well, at least you're not retching, right?
yeah, it's not as
You're not.
bad as
It's not
our show's arch enemy. Oh man.
yeah, it's
That's
not as
the
bad as Old Smoky.
old Smoky.
Oh
Ah,
man, oof.
it's bad. If y'all want to hear about Old Smoky, what was a few episodes ago? Oof. The first dungeon
Yeah,
crawler. Little.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, Glenn Cook.
yeah. Glenn Cook. Yeah. So this episode, we decided last time we wanted to talk about kind of like the origins of the grimdark book genre. The origins kind of go back to there's a couple different places you can kind of point to. We're going to be talking about Glenn Cook, he's first published The Black Company, the first sort of grimdark book series that's solidly, indisputably grimdark in what was it, 1984? Is that right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, 1984. And before we talk about him too much, we will get into the Black Company and what it sort of meant. I just want to really quickly, and we can each take a turn at this. I wanted to really quickly kind of define what grimdark is
Yeah.
for our audience, because some people may know, some people may not know. We've talked about Joe Abercrombie. He's grimdark. In fact, his Twitter handle is Lord Grimdark. So just the way I would kind of define it is that it is essentially a kind of fantasy noir. You often find in grimdark bleak worlds, morally gray at best, anti-hero protagonists. It's thematically dark. It's often violent. Some people would say it's realistic about the world, about heroes, about people, the nature of human beings. Other people would say it's overly cynical. The name Grimdark only started being used around a little after the year 2000. Basically, it comes from Warhammer 40,000.
Did
Uh,
not know that. Okay.
well, here's the thing. In the original rulebook for Warhammer 40,000, it began with the flavor text, "In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war."
Yeah.
Right? And so people originally in the Warhammer community coined the term grimdark. Over time, the term got repurposed to describe grim fantasy. Again, it's a synonym for gritty fantasy. You will find a lot of modern fantasy is, quote, grimdark. Some examples of grimdark would be things like Game of Thrones. And I know some people will actually take issue with that
Might be
categorization.
controversial. Yeah.
It might be controversial. Some people would say that's not.
There's an
It's
argument for that.
often, I
Yeah.
think there's a strong argument for Game of Thrones being grimdark. Um, some other ones other than Joe Abercrombie might include authors like Tamsin Muir, the Gideon the Ninth, and those books.
Malazan books.
The Malazan books.
Hmm.
Yeah. Uh, I've seen people categorize Mark Lawrence books as grimdark. I've seen R.F. Kuang's Poppy War books
Yeah.
as grimdark. among many others. It's a hugely popular genre right now.
Mhm.
It's kind of had a moment in the last 10 years, I would say. It's a lot of really popular, you know, best-selling series, but it's also kind of controversial. Both the definition is controversial, the categorization of a lot of these books is controversial. A lot of people don't like it. It's very controversial in terms of like it's not universally popular. There are a lot of people who are trying to kind of push back on it a little bit.
Probably for the reasons, yeah, that we defined, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So that's my shot at kind of defining
Hmm.
Grimdark. Yeah, what would you say about it, Dustin?
I think we're in line with that. I think in general, that's when you read something, and I always thought of the Death Clock guy. Right? He goes, "That's metal." It's like
Hmm.
there's these scenes and these characters that are just kind of over the top. That yet you're right. There's a cynical flavor to. I think that's very much a theme of Grimdark. Not a lot of optimism. And I think it's interesting you talked about the a trend because optimism hasn't really been a broad cultural trend the last few years, especially in the States. There's a lot of cynicism, and I think this is uh, maybe an instance where art is imitating life, and people are wanting to maybe explore that in their books. But yeah, I agree with the heroes. Heroes are usually anti-heroes, and you're right, like at best. Um, I think something I'd add to that is that the bad guys are typically like bad. Like if there's a villain or someone who does bad, it's not like Disney villain stuff. There's no like redemption arc. There's no like, well, I was hurt when I was a child. There's no traumatic story. And especially in the Glenn Cook novels, like the evil things are just they're evil and they do messed up evil stuff. And going back to the overall feeling that I get is it's a life sucks, then you die kind of feeling. There's lots of death, dying, and with that comes a lot of dark humor, I find. When I read Grimdark, usually the authors that I like, they'll kind of like wink a lot when they're talking about death so much. And there is a lot of gallows humor, and especially when there's like military and squad stuff going on, which tends to happen a lot. There's a lot of funny stuff that goes on because that's what people tend to do when there's a lot of death around. They start to joke about it. They have to find some way to let off that steam. And
Yeah, that's
so,
certainly one reaction. Yeah.
yeah. And I'll tell you, that's why I like Grimdark. I don't like Grimdark that doesn't have some element of that because then it's just like hammering you the whole time. And maybe we can go more into that. Like I want to, maybe that's why some people don't like Grimdark. It's kind of like being kicked while you're down a little bit. And um, like Malazan's a good example. I didn't finish that series because the last book was depressing to read. There was no the last several books, it was like all the grimdark, and there was no escape from it. There wasn't any humor. It was just
Mm.
oh, watch everything you love die, and I don't really want to read that all the time.
Yeah, I mean, and
So
there's one of the words I used was bleak,
yeah,
right? There's never really any hope in a lot of these stories. And when there is, it's fleeting. There's some reason for it that's like, well, you didn't really have any hope, but somehow you made it through, maybe through luck. Yeah, it's a very dark sort of genre usually. I think I said that, it sort of started with Glenn Cook's The Black Company series. Um, I think that's the only place that's where it sort of indisputably begins. There are some disputable books and stories and authors that were writing something that is heavily inspired Grimdark or could be potentially categorized as Grimdark that came before Glenn Cook. The one author I would submit, and we can talk. I actually want to do this as an episode unto itself. Is Michael Moorcock's Elric stories. It's a whole long series of novels and novelettes and um, short stories and whatnot that were published from like through the 60s and the 70s about a character named Elric of Melniboné. I think that's how you pronounce it. he's never actually said exactly how you pronounce it. Interestingly,
Ooh,
he has said it's kind of up to the reader how you pronounce it. But he
nice.
did put an accent on the E that makes me think that it's Melnibone, uh, rather than Melnibone. Anyway,
Mel Naboni.
Melnibone. Yeah. God, that's like nails on the chalkboard.
Reminds me of Nineveh or Nineve or
Yeah.
Nineve.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And we'll talk about Michael Moorcock at some point here.
yeah,
I don't know exactly when we'll do that episode, but I think we will do one because I think it deserves time because of how influential Elric, the character of Elric, has been
yeah.
across not only Grimdark but fantasy in general. I think it's as influential a character as some of Tolkien's characters. I mean, maybe, yeah, it's that influential. But Glenn Cook is sort of the first book where you can say, yes, this is Grimdark, and nobody will argue.
Yeah,
Right? Nobody will debate you.
yeah.
He's influenced a whole ton of authors. He's influenced a whole subgenre, essentially. The main thing that he published, he's sort of famous for a couple of books and series and characters. He wrote a series called The Dread Empire before this. He also wrote a hard-boiled detective series back in the day that followed a character named Garrett P.I. Never read that.
Oh
We're
yeah.
not going to talk about that,
I was
but it's
surprised by that when I
interesting.
looked at his catalog. Yeah,
Yeah, I found it interesting because of the comparison that I feel is apt. That initially was actually something my dad brought up when I was explaining Grimdark to him, not that long ago, um, and so I was then interested to see that in fact Glenn Cook has written a hard boiled detective series. I found that very interesting that because it is sort of it really is an apt comparison. I feel like all the same things you say or could say about Grimdark, dark, cynical, morally ambiguous, all those things. You can say that about hard boiled stuff, right? Hard boiled, pulp fiction from the 1930s or whatever, right? Or film noir, the kind of stuff that like Humphrey Bogart would have been in, right? You can
yeah,
say a lot of the same things about that or about sort of cyberpunk in sci-fi. And I know that's kind of gone its own way, but a lot of the same kinds of things, morally ambiguous, complex heroes, sort of anti-heroes. This sort of degeneracy of society is something that, is a big theme in these stories. I think it all kind of works for cyberpunk as well. Yeah, let's now that we've kind of defined or maybe overly defined Grimdark, spent a long time sort of talking about just what Grimdark is. What was your first experience with Glenn Cook?
I, so my first experience it still aligns with my view and some of my criticisms of Glenn Cook. I picked up two books from the used bookstore, and I bought them because there were three books inside of them. So his sets are released like that. They're kind of smaller books.
Hmm.
So I have two sets of them. And then I attempted to read them, and I found them to be inaccessible to me and difficult to read. And so I put
Yeah,
them on a shelf for years. And then 10 years later, I picked them up, and
yeah.
I had to there's a trick to reading Glenn Cook I found, at least for me. I had to read it with a British accent in my head. That was integral. I've learned that with British authors. You have to have their pacing in mind when you read, or else it's kind of kind of jilted in. And two,
He's American. He's not a British author.
you know what? You could have fooled me. The thing yeah, like he's American as you can get to. Like he's in the Navy,
Yeah.
and I was telling you earlier, he worked in a GM plant, so he's like super American, right? Making cars and all that. But now when you're reading it, you have to like he puts the weird Britishisms after the sentences and stuff, and you can imagine them all speaking with kind of Cockney accents and I don't know, whatever it was, it helped me
Yeah.
help me read the book. So
Yeah. Now one thing that's interesting about him that we sort of mentioned, we were talking about earlier
yeah.
off the air is that he was in the Navy. He was in the U.S. Navy from 1962 to 1972,
Hmm.
and he was attached for a while to a Marine Force recon unit.
Mhm.
He never saw combat himself. It's a major theme in the book
Mhm.
is uh, military. It's following, as you said, the Black Company, which is a mercenary group in this fantasy world. Now, you're also a veteran, right? You were in the army for a few years. Do you think, like, how do you think that works? Does it work? Is it genuine?
Well, now that you mention it, so I didn't read it before, and then
Mhm,
I read it after, and that made it more accessible too. There
mhm.
was yeah, there's a sense of like you're working with people that you don't necessarily like or want to be around, but you know them really, 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 really well. To,
Yeah.
and everyone has nicknames for each other, and it's very intimate in that way. Especially, I was kind of lower enlisted when I was in, so there's a lot of camaraderie there. There's a lot of, you're stationed with these people, and they're not really people you choose. They're chosen for you. So yeah, it had the the banter in there, the relationships in there. I felt like it was kind of authentic. Like it's in a weird way, like I didn't enjoy my time in the army, but in a
Yeah.
weird way it was kind of comforting seeing that and going back to one of the parts I did like about the army, which was the people. And I think if you ask anybody in the military, like the people are the best and the worst parts of the job. So it's kind of a complicated, like both and situation. But yeah, I think Glenn Cook kind of nails that feeling, and that's what his legacy is in the recent Grimdark. It's that you know groups of people in difficult situations together.
Yeah.
Um,
It's kind of like them against the world, right?
yeah,
Like, as dark as everything is, it's like there is this us against everything else kind
yeah,
of vibe that it has. And I would say it's not just in Glenn Cook, right? It's a grimdark theme.
mm,
Um, I find that there's like in Grimdark, not all Grimdark is military, right? But a lot of Grimdark has a military bent, like this a unit in the army or an officer in the army
yeah,
again, like whether it's Malazan or Joe Abercrombie.
yeah.
It feels like it's a common theme that maybe started with Glenn Cook. He still feels, going back and reading it, and this is as somebody who was not personally, I don't have any personal experience with being in the military or anything. I have a lot of friends who were in the military, but was never in myself. Of all of these authors, he by far and away feels the most authentic in terms of, like you talked about, the camaraderie.
Yeah. Well, 'cause he nails the nuances of it. Like I said, it's that weird thing where you could loathe somebody, but still you're on the same team and you work towards the same goal. And it's this weird, that was one of the first scenes in there. He's Croker's dealing with they get this guy to go clear out a bar, and
Yeah.
he's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't really like this guy. He's kind of a jerk, but he gets stuff done. And
Mhm.
most of my experiences in the army were like that. I had he who will not be named was one of our E7s, and he was just a terror, and everybody hated him, and it was the worst, and this and that, and there were some really serious issues. But you know what? Every now and then he would come to bat for us, and he would like save everything, and it was this
Mhm.
weird love hate thing, and that's he nailed it, and most units in the military have that going on. It's not all
Mhm.
sunshine and rainbows, and in fact, I have a hard time watching military anything now, because the way they show like the soldiers or the Marines or the sailors like in their bunks, and they're all just ha 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 ha, they're having like a grand old time, and it's like, man, that's some stuff for civilians, like,
Yeah.
who think that's what the camaraderie is. But yeah. So he nails that. And it is kind of grim dark. You're in the military, you're not like when you learn hand-to-hand combats, you're being trained. People. So it's not
Yeah.
it is grim. And you train like you fight, and people, it's just not sunshine and rainbows in the
Yeah.
military. So
Yeah. And there's this way in which they all sort of they get orders, they have a job to do, and they do the job, and they go about the business of doing the job.
yeah,
And sometimes the job is it's war, right? Sometimes the job is horrible, and in
yeah,
this case, they're literally their commanders, the people that have hired the Black Company, are the bad guys. Imagine
Hmm.
Imagine that you don't even really have to imagine, but imagine that it's Sauron, right?
Yeah,
that has hired the Black Company, right? I mean, that's
yeah,
essentially what the book is like. You have these bad guys, these like really super powerful, magical bad guys. They're basically Sauron,
yeah,
and they've hired the Black Company. Congratulations. Like imagine like you're reading Tolkien and instead of following the story from the perspective of, the hobbits and Aragorn or whoever, right? Like you're
yeah,
following the perspective from like the perspective of like or you're following the story from the perspective of like the Southrons people, like the people with the big
yeah,
elephants, right? Like that's who you're following, right? And so there's like this way in which like they know the commanders are bad. They know it. The commanders are awful. The commanders are always ordering them to slaughter innocent people. Like they know they're bad, but they got a job to do. They got to get on with it. They've been ordered to go to this town and burn it down. So, you know,
yeah.
they're going to do the job. That's the orders.
Oh,
They've been
yep.
paid.
And then
Yeah.
we might be getting it. Yeah, we might be getting back into like Cook's background with that a little bit too. I mean, that whole era was marked by a discontent with the military. Some of the
Mhm.
choices commanders made in Vietnam, and
Yeah.
let's see, some interesting parallels. I bet would come out.
There's even an interesting bit that I caught that I hadn't caught before. This is the third time I've read.
Mm,
Um, I didn't read the whole series this time. I stopped at the first book. But there's an interesting thing I didn't catch either of the previous two times. I don't know why I didn't catch it, but I caught it this time, which is that basically the main character is the doctor and the analyst. So that like the not analyst like modern like statistical sense, but like he's the guy that records the history for the Black Company, like
yeah.
the annals of the Black Company, and he's the guy that records them, and so he's always writing stuff down, and this whole thing is written as if it's his annals that he's writing essentially. And there's this moment where he's basically like, I leave a lot of stuff out. The Black Company are a bunch of rapists and
Yeah.
murderers, and I leave out most of the darkest deeds. And I thought that was really interesting because you were talking about, people that you don't like.
Yeah.
Like in that moment, like he's even saying, I'm not like these monsters.
Yeah.
These people are just animals. These people that we're serving with are animals. And they're doing like, I really want to hammer home the Black Company are the protagonists. They're the good guys
Good. Yeah.
in the sense that like they're the characters we're following. They're the characters that are like they're better than the bad guys. And some of the stuff we see the bad guys do is like demonic, horrific.
Yeah. It's like he spent some extra time
Yeah.
really thinking on how to bring it in and make the bad stuff bad. I mean, even like right off the
Mm-hmm.
bat, remember the what was the were leopard?
Mm-hmm. It was
It's
like a
not.
vampiric were leopard thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
let's add vampirism to the top, but yeah,
Yeah.
it didn't just kill the guys or suck the blood out. It's like no, it ate the heart and the liver and it ripped them. It did this and that, and they left him in a crypt full of this and that, and he has a way of of ramping it up that sticks out in the memory
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah,
Yeah, what's also interesting is their enemy, and I say the enemy, the antagonist, the rebels that are fighting against the lady and ultimately like the dominator, who's you call it the dominator. Uh, so the rebels who are fighting them, they're not good either. They're all human, right? I mean, like there's essentially nobody in this who you would say, oh yeah, clearly a good guy. This is the good guy. This is the protagonist. Like you have anti-heroes. At best you have realistic sort of anti-hero protagonists who are doing the best they can in the circumstances they're in.
well, it ends up being like one of those morality tests you hear about because it's like there's no really good options, and like as a reader,
Mm,
you're sitting there and you're like, everybody's kind of terrible. These guys are more terrible, and I
yeah.
think that's kind of why I like it too. I kind of enjoyed the thought experiments of those, like, hey, if this train track saves 100 people, but this train track,
Yeah.
you know, goes
Yeah.
this way. And yeah, it's like a whole book series with that. And yeah, you find yourself rooting for terrible people,
Yeah.
that are
Because they're not
objectively,
quite as bad.
yeah,
The interesting thing is, I don't think he was trying to write the darkest, grimmest thing he could. I mean, obviously, the term grimdark didn't exist then. There wasn't gritty fantasy, when he was writing. There was nothing like that. It was all Tolkien and kind of, or for the most part, it was Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and
Yeah.
uh, nobody was writing gritty fantasy.
Yeah.
I don't think he was trying to write something in, at least in rereading this. I think what he was trying to do, I think he was trying to write what he saw as realistic fantasy, fantasy with realistic characters, fantasy with realistic sort of moral conundrums and realistic quote heroes, realistic soldiers, and I think that he wasn't trying to start anything other than he wanted to create a fantasy series that was more authentic. What he ended up doing was inspiring a whole generation of fantasy authors to do the same thing, kind of, and to do it in a way which, now is being labeled grimdark, for better or worse. I don't feel like I would necessarily recommend The Black Company to most readers.
Yeah, I get that.
I
Yeah.
feel like I would recommend it to some people, to a certain kind of reader. I think if you're looking for, you either are looking for really good military sort of fantasy, dark military fantasy. I think if you're reading to try to understand the genre better and to look
Mhm.
for sort of what the sort of history of the genre is, I think I would recommend it. I don't know that I would just recommend it for just anybody or any old fantasy reader. How about you?
I'm kind of with you. I think there's a reason I only enjoyed it at this part of my life, basically. I think it's for two things. I think it was the military background type stuff.
Hmm.
It scratches an itch, it's like when you read someone who kind of gets it. I mean, there's other stuff we didn't talk about too that was remarkable, but I felt like Leonardo DiCaprio and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There's that.
Yeah.
Because I've read all these other books and I've read all this other Grimdark, and there's just so many points in the book where you're like, that's that. This is where it started. It's
Yeah.
seminal,
Yeah.
and it's really fun to read for that. You go, oh, this whole thing I loved was based off of this scene. Like you could tell
Yeah.
this directly influenced like your favorite authors. So it's kind of cool like that. But like you said, that's not everyone's cup of tea. And
Hmm.
I think it's something that really hits if you've read a lot of stuff. Um, my overall kind of thing, it might help some listeners. Like reading this book is almost like driving an older muscle car. Like it's fun,
Hmm.
but it's finicky, and it
Yeah.
doesn't have a lot of the creature comforts that you might have become used to in your
Yeah.
modern Subaru.
It's not super
Yeah.
polished, right?
No,
Yeah. No. It's a little
no,
rough. A little
yeah,
rough.
which kind of gives it its mystique. But also, I found myself feeling that when I read it. Like I've become used to like people who've like built upon this and kind of polished that a little bit,
Hmm.
but there's still value in seeing the base, like the undistilled, like raw form of it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I feel like it's the kind of thing that, like, in the day that it got published, it was totally original.
yeah,
It was unique when it got published. It's one of those things where, like, you watch an old movie and you're like, well, it wasn't so good. Yeah, but you've seen a million things that were like inspired by it and improved upon it. And, it's sort of one of those things, right? If you're going to read it, keep that in mind. Nothing like it had been published when it came out. Even the other one we've talked about, Elric, is very different from this.
yeah.
This was a new thing. Like, it's very rare that a new thing ever gets published. This was a new thing when it came out, and it's influenced a lot of authors you've heard of, a lot of books you've read, and it's pretty good in its own right. Even now, definitely go in knowing that it is a product of its time, right? A
Yeah,
product of like 1984.
yeah, I think that's very well said, Gus.
Yeah. What do you got? Anything else you want to say before we sign off?
I think that's pretty much it.
Well, I think we're done.
All
So,
right,
all right,
stay
bye.
gold.
No, all right. Well, thank you all for listening, and
Yeah.
we will see you on the next one. And stay gold, apparently.
Yes,
So
stay gold, of
I
course.
don't know. Is that really what we're going with? We're gonna
Let's
come with
keep it,
something
man.
else.
I think every time we end, it should be like this.
It'll be stay gold, or it'll be
Nah,
kind of
just
like what, like who, and then it'll
yeah,
just end.
that just ends.
Then it'll just end.
That's our own thing. We don't need to have an ending.
Yeah. Who needs an outro?
Nah.
All righty.
All right, man.
All right.
Take care,
Have a
guys.
good night.
You too, man. Stop the thing here.
We're gonna
That's
end
fine.
it. I'm gonna edit this out,
Cool.
and I'm not. I'm gonna leave it in.
Leave it. Leave it in.